Jacob Sampson was 31 years old, a lawyer living in Delaware. But before he became the man he was today, he had once been a boy living in darkness, where screams and bruises were a part of his childhood. His story began in a small town where red dirt roads led to old houses. From the outside, his family looked peaceful, but inside, it was a nightmare. He remembered the strong smell of cheap liquor on his father's breath every time the man stumbled through the door. His father was tall and burly with sinewy hands and an anger that made no sense. His mother, a gentle woman named Grace with sad eyes, always tried to keep the peace. But it was never enough. On the nights when his father was drunk, their little house became a war zone. Plates broke, his mother cried, and his father growled like an angry animal. He couldn't escape. Jacob was only 6 when he first felt the force of his father's fist. It was a winter evening, and snow had covered the road outside. He had spilled a glass of milk at dinner. Just a small mistake. But to his father, it was a reason to explode. "You think this is your house to do whatever you want?" Hillary had roared, eyes bloodshot. Before Jacob could even understand what was happening, his father's hand hit his shoulder, so hard he fell to the floor. His mother rushed over, using her body to shield him. "Please, Hillary, he's just a child," she said, her voice shaking. But Hillary didn't stop. He grabbed her by the hair and pulled her away. The sound of hitting and shouting echoed in their small kitchen. All Jacob could do was curl into a ball, covering his head and trying not to hear his mother's screams. Later that night, after Hillary had passed out, Grace cleaned up the broken glass. She sat on Jacob's bed and gently rubbed his bruised shoulder. "Jacob, you have to be strong, okay?" she whispered with a choked voice. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better." He didn't understand why she was the one saying sorry. She was the only light in that dark home. He hugged her tightly, feeling her trembling body, and made a promise to himself. One day, he would save her from the monster that was his father. The years got worse. Hillary lost his job at the factory and turned to alcohol every day. Whenever he was drunk, he would find a reason to hurt either Jacob or Grace. Once, he threw Jacob against the wall just for laughing too loudly while watching TV. Another time, he beat Grace so badly she couldn't stand, just because she asked where he had been all night. Her bruises grew in number, but she always tried to hide them with long-sleeved shirts, even in summer. Still, in the middle of all that suffering, Jacob and Grace found small moments of peace. After each beating, she would take him to the backyard. An old oak tree stood there with a thick canopy. They would sit beneath it. Sometimes she told him fairy tales. Other times, they just watched the stars. "Jacob, do you see? Even when it's dark, the stars are always there," she said softly. "You have to be like that. Keep shining, no matter how hard life gets." Her words stayed in his mind and gave him just enough hope to survive. But he wasn't always strong. On some nights, when he heard Grace screaming in the living room, he hid in the closet with a pillow, praying it would stop. He hated that he was too small to help her. He hated Hillary. And sometimes he hated the world for not rescuing them. When Jacob was 8, his sister Kayla was born. She was a miracle. She had big eyes and a glowing smile. Her presence gave hope to both him and Grace. What shocked him most was how Hillary treated Kayla. He was gentle with her. He didn't yell. He smiled and called her my treasure. Jacob didn't understand how someone so cruel to him and Grace could be so kind to Kayla. But he was thankful for it. He never wanted her to go through what they had suffered. Still, that favoritism made him feel even more alone. One day, he accidentally dropped one of Kayla's toys. Hillary slapped him so hard that his ears rang. "How dare you make your sister cry?" Hillary shouted. But Kayla hadn't cried over the toy. She cried because she saw Jacob get hit. She ran to him, but Hillary pulled her away and held her, comforting her like Jacob was the villain. Grace stood nearby, helpless, with red eyes. That night, she held both children close and whispered, "I love you both. No matter what happens, you'll always have me." But deep down, Jacob knew she was falling apart. His childhood was full of fear and pain. He learned how to avoid his father, how to stay quiet when he was drunk, and how to hide the bruises from his friends. He didn't want their pity. He didn't want anyone to know his home was a nightmare. But each time he saw new wounds on Grace, his heart broke again. Jacob began to dream of a day when he would be old and strong enough to take his mother and Kayla away from that house, away from his cruel father. When he turned 13, things got even worse. Hillary drank more, and the beatings became more brutal. One night, He hit Grace so hard that she passed out on the floor. Jacob rushed to her, screaming, "Stop! You'll kill her." But Hillary just stared at him with cold, empty eyes and kicked him aside. Jacob lay there helpless, watching his mother lie still on the floor. His heart shattered. That night, when she came to, she tried to smile at him, but he saw the pain in her eyes. "Jacob, you have to survive for me, for Kayla," she whispered weakly. He nodded, but deep inside, he knew if he didn't do something soon, he might lose her forever. Jacob started making plans. He would grow up, make a lot of money, and take his mother and sister away. He studied hard, even though each day at school was a battle to hide the pain and bruises both outside and in. He believed education was the only way out of their hell. But time wasn't on their side. Hillary was becoming more unstable. With each day, Jacob feared that one day he would go too far. At 16, when most boys were focused on school tests or maybe a first date, Jacob lived in fear. He constantly wondered if that would be the day his mother couldn't take it anymore. Their house felt like a ticking time bomb. The arguments between his parents grew worse, often about another woman. Jacob rarely heard Grace talk back to Hillary. But once he heard her yell, "If you bring her here, I'll kill myself right in front of you." Hillary shouted back instantly, his voice thick with alcohol. "You dare threaten me? You're nothing, Grace. You think you can stop me? You're just a useless woman." Those words were like knives cutting deep. Jacob began to notice things. His mother looked more tired. Her shoulders slumped. One day, he found her sitting quietly in the kitchen, staring at the wall and holding a cold cup of tea. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked carefully. She gave a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I've fine, Jacob. Just look after Kayla, okay?" she said softly, turning her face to the side. He knew she was trying to hide her pain. She always did. But Jacob couldn't bear to see her slowly breaking. So he began writing things down. Every time Hillary got drunk, every argument, every new bruise, he recorded it all in an old notebook. He hid it under a loose floorboard in his bedroom. He didn't even know exactly why. Maybe one day it would help him do something, anything, to save her. But at 16, he was still just a boy. His father was strong and cruel. Life wasn't fair. And then came the day that changed everything. It was a cold afternoon in October. The sky was gray and a light rain was falling. Jacob had stayed late at the library to finish an essay. When he got home, the house was quiet. Too quiet. No arguments. No television. No laughter from Kayla. No soft singing from Grace in the kitchen. Just Hillary sitting on the sofa with an empty liquor bottle rolling on the floor. He looked up at Jacob, his eyes cloudy. "Your mom," he said. "She fell down the stairs. She's in the hospital." Jacob froze. "Fell down the stairs?" he repeated. "How? What did you do to her?" Hillary jumped up, grabbed Jacob by the collar and shouted, "You dare talk to me like that? I didn't do anything. She fell." "Got it." He shoved Jacob to the floor and walked off, mumbling about getting more liquor. Jacob didn't care. He didn't even grab a jacket. He ran out into the rain and headed to the hospital a few blocks away. When he got there, a nurse led him to the emergency room. Kayla was in the hallway, her eyes swollen and red. She was clutching the doll Grace had made for her. "Jacob!" she cried and ran into his arms. "Mom, she won't wake up." He held her tightly. His heart was breaking, but he tried not to cry. A nurse guided him into the hospital room. Grace lay still on the bed, her face pale. Her eyes were closed. There were bruises on her arms and neck, clear signs of violence. Under the harsh hospital light, they looked even worse. The doctor, a serious-looking man, spoke quietly. "She suffered a severe head injury from the fall. We did everything we could, but," he paused. "She didn't make it. I'm so sorry." Jacob didn't know how long he stood there. He just held her cold hand and stared at her, unable to speak or cry. The warmth she always gave him was gone. He wanted to scream, to break something, to go home and confront his father. But he couldn't. He couldn't even move. He stood frozen, while Kayla clung to him crying. "It's okay, Kayla," he whispered, though he didn't believe it himself. "I'll take care of you." The days that followed were like a terrible dream. Hillary arranged Grace's funeral, but he didn't cry. He wore an old suit that smelled like alcohol and didn't say a word to either of them. Neighbors came to say they were sorry, whispering things like tragic accident. But Jacob saw the truth in their eyes. They knew. They just didn't have the courage to speak up. He wanted to scream and tell everyone his mother didn't just fall. She was pushed. She had suffered for years, and no one did anything. But he had no proof. His notebook wasn't enough. He was just a teenager, and the law didn't protect kids like him. The night after the funeral, Jacob lay awake staring at the ceiling. He felt like a piece of him had been ripped out. He remembered her last words to him. Just days before she died, she had hugged him and whispered, "Jacob, you're my hope. No matter what happens, you have to keep going. Stay strong." He had nodded then. But now, that promise felt like a heavy burden. She was gone, and he hadn't saved her. What hurt the most were the doubts. The painful, heavy doubts he couldn't shake. Jacob remembered the arguments during his mother's final months. Fights about Hillary's affair with a woman named Jenny Ron. He had heard Grace confront him one night. Her voice was trembling, but she spoke with courage. "Hillary, you think I don't know? You're seeing her again? How long has it been going on?" Hillary had scoffed and called her crazy, but Jacob saw the fear in his father's eyes. Had she found out too much? Had he pushed her down the stairs to silence her? Those questions haunted him every day, refusing to let him rest. Jacob began his own quiet investigation. When Hillary passed out drunk, he sneaked into the bedroom and searched for anything that could be a clue. One night, he found an old phone hidden in a drawer. Inside were messages exchanged between Hillary and Jenny. Some were affectionate, but others were filled with tension. "Grace knows. She'll ruin everything," one message read. "I'll handle it," another said. His heart pounded as he read those words. But he knew that as a 16-year-old, those texts wouldn't be enough to bring Hillary to justice. He took the story to the only adult he trusted, Miss Mills, a teacher at school. She listened closely, concern written all over her face. But after a long pause, she shook her head. "Jacob, you need something stronger. These texts could be misunderstood. And confronting your father without real proof is dangerous. You're still a kid." He knew she was right, but the truth still hurt like a knife. He was powerless, and Grace was gone forever. 2 weeks after the funeral, Hillary brought Jenny into their home. She walked in as though the house already belonged to her, laughing and chatting with Hillary like Grace had never existed. Jacob stood in the corner, fists clenched, blood boiling. "Who is she?" he demanded. Hillary looked him in the eye, completely cold. "This is Jenny. She's going to live here now. And if you don't like it, you can leave." The words hit him like a punch. He wanted to charge at him, to scream and fight, to make Hillary feel a fraction of the pain he'd caused. But Jacob held back. He looked over and saw Kayla standing in the doorway, eyes wide with fear. He knew he had to wait. He needed a plan. The house became suffocating. Jenny's strong perfume mixed with Hillary's alcohol, creating an air Jacob could barely breathe. Jenny acted like she owned everything. She cooked in the same kitchen Grace once stood in. She lounged on the same couch where Grace once cradled her children and told bedtime stories. Jenny started giving orders, especially to Kayla, telling her to clean up or threatening to take away her toys. Jacob saw the fear in Kayla's eyes each time Jenny yelled. It broke his heart. But he had no job, no power, no place to go. He tried to stay calm for Kayla. At night, he lay beside her, whispering comfort. "Don't worry. I'll get us out of here someday." "Jacob, you won't leave me, right?" she asked, trembling. He pulled her close. "Never, Kayla. I promise." But that promise felt heavier every day, like a weight he didn't know how to carry. Everything came crashing down one Saturday night, a month after Grace's funeral. Jacob had taken a part-time job at a nearby grocery store. He was trying to save money, hoping he could take Kayla somewhere. Anywhere, away from Hillary and Jenny. When he got home that evening, it was dark inside. He heard shouting from the living room. Jenny was yelling at Kayla. "You're as clumsy as your mother," she snapped after Kayla spilled a glass of water. Kayla stood frozen, crying, her tiny hands shaking. Jacob had seen enough. He stormed in. "Leave my sister alone." Jenny spun around, her voice cold. "Oh, the brave little boy speaks up now? Who do you think you are, talking to me like that?" She stepped forward and raised her hand to slap him, but Jacob caught her wrist midair. "Don't touch me or my sister," he said through clenched teeth. His heart was racing. That was when Hillary walked in, a bottle in hand, eyes red and glassy. "What the hell is going on?" he roared. Jenny quickly pointed at Jacob. "Your son disrespected me. He thinks he runs this house." Hillary turned his gaze on Jacob. His voice exploded with rage. "You touched her." "I didn't touch her," Jacob replied, standing his ground even as his legs shook. "I was protecting Kayla. She has no right to scream at her. Hillary snapped. He grabbed Jacob by the shirt and dragged him to the front door. You want to act like a man? Then get out of my house. He shoved Jacob onto the front steps, opened the door wide and shouted, This isn't your home anymore. Get out. The door slammed behind him. Jacob sat there in the cold as rain began to fall. The sound of the lock turning felt like a final blow. He had nothing, no wallet, no food, not even a jacket. Just a backpack with his grocery store uniform. He stared at the closed door. From inside, he could still hear Kayla crying. His heart shattered. He wanted to run back in, grab her, and never let her go. But he couldn't. Hillary was stronger, violent. Jacob didn't stand a chance. So he stood up, wiped the tears from his face, and whispered to himself, I'll come back for you, Kayla. I swear. He wandered the streets for hours, cold and lost. That night, he curled up in a quiet park, clutching his backpack, trying to stay warm. His body shivered, but his heart felt even colder. He thought about Grace, about the nights they sat beneath the oak tree in their backyard. He closed his eyes and whispered into the dark, Mom, what do I do now? But only the wind answered. The next morning, Jacob went to the house of Jake, his best friend from school. He stood at the door, hesitant, but he had no other choice. When Jake opened the door and saw him, clothes soaked, eyes red, he pulled him inside without a word. Jake's mother, Judith, was a kind woman. She gave Jacob a hot breakfast and sat him down to talk. He told her everything, about his mother, his father, Jenny, and how he had been kicked out. Judith hugged him, and Jacob, though 16, cried like a child in her arms. She let him stay for a few days, but he knew he couldn't stay forever. He didn't want to be a burden, and he was afraid Hillary might come looking for trouble. Then he thought of his Aunt Tina, his mother's younger sister who lived a few hours away. Tina and Grace had once been close, but after Grace married Hillary, Tina had distanced herself. She couldn't stand him. Still, she and her husband had come to the funeral. Tina had cried and offered Jacob encouragement. He decided to call her. Jacob. Her voice came through the phone, full of surprise and concern. He explained everything. His voice shook. Aunt Tina, I don't know where to go. Kayla is still there, with Dad and that woman. I need help. She didn't hesitate. Come here right now. I'll take you in. We'll figure out how to help Kayla. Her words were like a light in the darkness. For the first time in days, he felt a small glimmer of hope. Judith took him to the bus station. She pressed some money and a bag of food into his hands. Jacob, you're a strong boy, she said, her eyes misty. Take care of yourself. Don't give up on your sister. He nodded, hugged her one last time, and boarded the bus. As the bus pulled away from the town, Jacob looked out the window, feeling like a part of him had been left behind. But he knew he had to go, for Kayla, for his mother, and for himself. The journey to Tina's house wasn't long, but to him, it felt endless. He sat on the bus, clutching his backpack, thinking about everything that had happened. He wondered if he could ever go back to save Kayla. He wondered if Hillary would hurt her the same way he had hurt Grace. Those thoughts made him sick, but he told himself to stay calm. Tina would help him. They'd find a way. When he arrived, Tina was waiting at the bus station. Her eyes were red, but her smile was warm. She hugged him tightly, and for the first time in a long while, Jacob felt something like peace. You've been through so much, she said, her voice trembling. From now on, I'll take care of you. She brought him to her home, a small but cozy apartment in the suburbs. Her husband, Anderson, was a tall man, a former football player with a kind heart. He patted Jacob's shoulder and said, Welcome to the family, kid. The first few days with them, Jacob felt like a ghost. He ate, slept, and went to school, but his mind never left Kayla. He called Jake often, asking him to keep an eye on her. Jake told him she still went to school, but she seemed sad and quieter than before. Jacob knew he had to act, but first he needed time to stabilize. Tina and Anderson helped him in every way they could. Tina enrolled him in a new school, bought him clothes and books. Anderson began teaching him basic self-defense. A man needs to protect the people he loves, he said. Jacob nodded, but he knew fists weren't enough. He needed something stronger. Knowledge, planning, and patience. He started rebuilding his life. But every night he dreamed of Grace. In those dreams, she stood under the oak tree in the backyard, smiling at him. Jacob, you have to save Kayla, she said. He would wake up drenched in sweat. And every time he whispered to himself, I won't fail. I'll go back. I'll get her out of that place. Living with Aunt Tina and Uncle Anderson was a big change. Their small apartment, with its cream-colored walls and the smell of freshly baked cookies, gave him a kind of safety he hadn't felt since Grace died. But when he closed his eyes, all he could see was Kayla, her big, frightened eyes cowering before Jenny. That image haunted him. He couldn't rest. Not yet. He knew he needed a plan. Hillary was violent. Jenny, though a woman, was just as cruel. He had to be smart. Jacob confided in Tina. He told her everything, his father's beatings, his mother's suspicious death, and how Jenny treated Kayla. Tina sat in silence, hands clenched, eyes watery. "Jacob, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice broken. "I didn't know it was this bad. I should have taken you kids away sooner." He shook his head. "It's not your fault. But now I need your help. I have to get Kayla out." She nodded. "We'll do it. But we need to be smart. Your father, he's dangerous." She turned to Anderson, who had been sitting on the couch, listening. He stood up and placed a firm hand on Jacob's shoulder. "I'll go with you," Anderson said. "No one's going to hurt your sister again." With Anderson's strength and calm nature, Jacob felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The drive back to Jacob's hometown took 3 hours, but it felt like forever. He sat in the back seat, gripping his backpack, doing his best to stay calm. Anderson focused on the road. Tina sat beside Jacob, holding his hand. "It'll be okay, Jacob. We'll bring Kayla home," she said. But inside, his worry was growing. When they finally reached the town, it was almost noon. The old house stood like a shadow from the past. It looked worse than before. Windows coated in dust, the front yard overgrown with weeds. Jacob took a deep breath and tried to bury his fear. "I'll go in first," he said. "You and Uncle Anderson wait. I'll give a signal." Anderson shook his head. "No, we go in together. It's safer." Jacob wanted to argue, but one look at Anderson's firm expression stopped him. They stepped onto the porch, Jacob's heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. He knocked on the door, trying to keep his voice steady. "Kayla, it's me." There was no answer. He knocked harder, and then the door swung open. Jenny stood there, her eyes sharp with hatred. "What do you want?" she snapped, placing her hands on her hips. He didn't respond. He just pushed past her and stepped into the house. "Kayla," he called, his voice echoing. "Jacob," came the faint voice from the bedroom. He ran to it, flung the door open, and saw his sister sitting on the bed, clutching her doll. Her left cheek was red, fresh from a slap. Her eyes lit up at the sight of him, but she burst into tears. I thought you left me." He knelt and pulled her into a hug. "Never, Kayla. I'm here now." But the moment was short. Jenny's shriek came from the hallway. "What are you doing in my house?" Jacob turned to see her at the doorway. Behind her, Hillary staggered out of the living room with a bottle in hand. "You bastard," Hillary growled, stepping toward him. "You dare come back here?" Before Jacob could speak, Anderson stepped in, his massive frame blocking the hallway. "Hillary, calm down." His voice was low but firm. "We're here to take Kayla. Don't make this worse." Hillary sneered, but Jacob saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. "Take her? This is my house. I'm her father." Tina stepped forward, her voice icy and sure. "You beat Grace, my sister. And now you're letting your mistress abuse Kayla, my niece. You don't deserve to be her father." Jenny shouted back, "You're lying. I didn't do anything to that kid." But Kayla, still clinging to Jacob, sobbed into his chest. "She hit me. She hits me when Dad's not looking." That was all Jacob needed. He stood up, keeping Kayla close behind him. "We're leaving," he said, locking eyes with Hillary. "And if you try to stop us, Anderson won't go easy on you." Hillary stepped back, his expression caught between rage and fear. Anderson stepped forward, and Hillary faltered. Jenny screamed something, but Tina grabbed her arm and pulled her outside. "Shut up, Jenny. You don't belong here." They left the house with Kayla gripping Jacob's hand tightly, her doll swinging from the other. Hillary stood at the door and didn't follow. Maybe he finally understood he couldn't win. In the car, Kayla hugged Jacob tightly, still crying. "I was scared. I thought you weren't coming back." He kissed her head, his own tears falling. "I'm sorry, Kayla. I'll never leave you again." On the drive home, Kayla fell asleep in his arms, her face finally at peace. Tina looked back at them through the rearview mirror and smiled. "You did well, Jacob." But he didn't feel like he had. He had left her there too long. Every day she spent in that house was a day he had failed. Still, she was safe now. And that was what mattered most. Back at Tina's apartment, Kayla was bathed and given a hot dinner. That night, she smiled for the first time in months, and Jacob felt a flicker of hope. But he knew the journey wasn't over. Hillary, Jenny, and the memories of the past still lingered. He had to become stronger. Not just for himself, but for Kayla, for Grace, and for justice. The days after bringing Kayla home were a strange mix of peace and unease. Jacob watched her play in Tina's backyard, softly singing to the doll their mother had made. He knew he had done the right thing. But every time she hugged him and whispered, "Thank you, Jacob," his heart ached. He had left her in that house too long. He should have protected her sooner. He made a vow, no one would hurt her again. To do that, he needed more than fists. He needed knowledge. He needed the law. The idea came naturally. It felt like it had always been there, waiting for him. Grace had lived her life in silence, suffering because she had no one to defend her. No money, no protection, no help. Jacob didn't want anyone else to suffer like she had. He wanted to be the kind of person his mother had needed. Someone who could fight with more than words. Someone who knew the law. He shared his plan with Tina one evening over hot tea. "Aunt Tina," he said, his voice nervous, "I want to study law. I want to become a lawyer. To help people like Mom. Like Kayla." She looked at him, her eyes wet but full of pride. "Jacob, that's a tough road. But I believe in you. You have your mother's heart. Strong. Always fighting." She reached across the table and took his hand. He felt a kind of support he'd never known growing up. From the living room, Anderson looked up from his newspaper. "A lawyer, huh? That's good, kid. But you'll have to work hard. Law isn't a game." He gave a half smile but spoke with seriousness. "I've got a friend downtown who's a lawyer. If you want, I'll introduce you. You can see what it's like." Jacob nodded eagerly, heart racing. It was the first step, and he was ready. In the following days, he threw himself into school like never before. His new school wasn't fancy, but it had dedicated teachers. Miss Luke, his literature teacher, noticed the change. "Jacob, you're really focused," she said one afternoon after he turned in an essay early. "What's driving you?" He hesitated, then quietly said, "I want to be a lawyer." She smiled. "That's a good reason, and a good heart behind it. If you ever need help, I'm here." From then on, Miss Luke became his mentor. She introduced him to books on law and helped him improve his writing. In his senior year of high school, Jacob earned excellent grades, enough to apply to a university with a pre-law program. Aunt Tina and Uncle Anderson were so proud that they threw a small party to celebrate. Kayla, now 9 years old, gave him a drawing she had made of him standing under the oak tree, holding a book, with their mother smiling beside him. "You'll do it, Jacob," she said, her eyes sparkling. He hugged her, tears running down his face. "Thank you, Kayla. I'll do it for you and for Mom." He received a scholarship to a university a few hours from Tina's house. On the day he left, he hugged Kayla tightly, promising to call every day. Tina slipped some money into his hand, even though he knew she didn't have much. "You're my pride," she said, her eyes red. Anderson patted his shoulder. "Keep fighting, kid." Jacob nodded and boarded the bus, carrying both his dreams and the weight of his past. At university, he studied like a man on a mission. He majored in political science, took law-related courses, and worked part-time at the library to cover expenses. Life wasn't easy. There were nights he stayed up late studying, worrying about Kayla, haunted by memories of Grace. But whenever he felt like giving up, he looked at Kayla's drawing on his desk. The image of his mother under the oak tree reminded him why he had to keep going. For years later, he graduated with honors and was accepted into a prestigious law school. That moment confirmed he was on the right path. He called Kayla, hearing her cheer over the phone. "You're a lawyer now, Jacob." He laughed, even as tears ran down his cheeks. "Not yet, Kayla, but I'm almost there." Law school was a whole different world. It was a battleground where strong minds and determination were tested every day. He chose to specialize in family and matrimonial law, a field where he knew he could make a difference. He read hundreds of cases, stories about domestic violence, women and children trapped in terrible homes. Each one reminded him of his mother, of everything she endured under Hillary's control. He made a vow to become a voice for the voiceless, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, so that no one else would suffer like Grace had. In his third year of law school, Jacob began working as an intern at a small law firm in Delaware, where he hoped to build his career after graduation. The firm handled marriage and divorce disputes. He quickly learned how to work with empathy while keeping his emotions in check. Mr. Samuel, the senior attorney, became an excellent mentor. He noticed Jacob's passion and often gave him challenging tasks, from legal research to assisting with trial preparation. "You've got potential, Jacob," he once said, "but don't let emotions take over. The law isn't always fair, but you can help make it fairer." One March morning, as Jacob sat in the office reviewing a case file, the secretary knocked on his door. "Jacob, Mr. Samuel wants to see you. There's a new case he wants you to take a look at." Jacob nodded, grabbed his notebook, and walked into Mr. Samuel's office. He was seated behind his desk, looking serious. "Jacob, this is a domestic violence case. The client is a woman named Jenny Ron. She's seeking a divorce and an emergency protective order against her husband who's been abusing her." Jacob nodded, writing down the details. But his hand froze when Mr. Samuel slid the file across the desk. The defendant's name hit him like a punch: Hillary Sampson. His father. He felt the blood drain from his face. His hands trembled so badly that he dropped his pen. "You okay, Jacob?" Mr. Samuel asked, frowning. Jacob took a deep breath and tried to keep his voice steady. I'm fine, sir. It's just, I know this man." Mr. Samuel narrowed his eyes. "You know him? How? Is there a conflict of interest?" Jacob hesitated. A part of him wanted to walk away, to run from the pain and darkness of his past. But then he thought of Grace, of all the years she endured Hillary's abuse, of her suspicious death. He thought of Jenny, once his enemy, now another victim of the same man who had destroyed his family. If he refused, who would help her? Who would finally hold Hillary accountable? Jacob looked Mr. Samuel in the eye. "I know him, but I can handle it. I want to take this case." Mr. Samuel nodded, though there was caution in his eyes. "All right, but if it gets too much, you come to me. This won't be easy. I need you focused." Jacob nodded, took the file, and left the office. Back at his desk, he opened the file. Each page felt like reopening an old wound. Jenny had accused Hillary of beating her, threatening to kill her if she ever tried to leave. She had provided photos of bruises, threatening text messages, and a medical report documenting her worst injury. Jacob looked at the photos. He saw Grace. He remembered the bruises she hid under long sleeves, the nights she wept quietly in the kitchen, the silence she carried day after day. He decided to meet Jenny and hear her story. The meeting was arranged in the office with Mr. Samuel present. When Jenny walked in, Jacob barely recognized her. The woman who had once sneered at Kayla and laughed when Hillary threw Jacob out was now thin, broken, and frightened. She looked at him, and recognition flickered in her eyes. "Jacob," she whispered. Is it really you?" He nodded, keeping his voice professional. "I'm the intern assisting with your case. Please tell me everything." Jenny sat down, her hands shaking as she held a glass of water. She spoke softly, her voice full of pain. "After Kayla and you left, he changed. At first, it was just yelling. Then he started hitting me. Every time I tried to leave, he said he'd kill me." She looked down, eyes full of shame. "I didn't know what to do." Jacob listened, but inside a storm brewed. He remembered how she had treated him and Kayla, how she stood by Hillary's side when they were thrown out. But now, she looked like Grace once had. Trapped, alone, terrified. And even though he had hated her, Jacob knew what he had to do. She was a victim too, just like his mother, just like Kayla, just like him. And he was going to help her. Preparing for the case was a massive challenge. Jacob worked day and night researching domestic violence laws, gathering evidence, and building arguments. Hillary had hired a lawyer, a confident middle-aged man, but Jacob knew he didn't have the upper hand. The evidence was overwhelming. Photos, texts, medical reports, and Jenny's testimony. On the day of the trial, Jacob stood in the courtroom with his heart pounding. It wasn't his first time in court as an intern, but it was his first time facing his father. When Hillary walked in, Jacob barely recognized him. He was thinner, with grayer hair, but his eyes still held that cold, hateful glare. He glanced at Jacob with a smirk flickering on his lips. "You bastard," Hillary muttered, loud enough for Jacob to hear. Jacob clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. He couldn't let himself be provoked, not today. The trial began, and Jenny took the witness stand. Her voice trembled, but she spoke clearly. She described the beatings, the threats, and the nights she feared for her life. Jacob watched as some members of the jury shook their heads in disbelief and horror. But when Hillary's lawyer cross-examined her, he tried to discredit her, suggesting that she was unstable, that she had injured herself to frame Hillary. Jacob felt fury rising inside him and wanted to shout, but Mr. Samuel placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Stay calm, Jacob. We have the evidence." When it was Jacob's turn to speak, he stood before the jury and talked about the hidden scars domestic violence left, not just on the body, but on the soul. He presented the photos, the texts, the medical records. He explained that Hillary was a danger, not only to Jenny, but to anyone near him. He never mentioned his mother, Kayla, or himself, but every word carried the weight of everything he had lived through. When Jacob returned to his seat, Mr. Samuel nodded at him, eyes full of quiet pride. Then Hillary took the stand. He put on a performance, tears in his eyes, claiming to love Jenny, saying he never meant to hurt her. "I'm just an ordinary man who made mistakes," he said, voice cracking. Jacob gripped his hands under the table. He knew it was all lies, but he also knew some members of the jury might believe him. The trial lasted 2 days. Every minute tested Jacob's nerves. The night before the verdict, he didn't sleep. He sat in his small apartment, staring at Kayla's drawing, whispering to his mother, "Mom, I'm trying to do the right thing." He didn't know if she could hear him, but he felt a strange sense of peace, as if she was there, standing beside him. On the day of the verdict, the judge read the decision. Hillary was convicted of domestic violence. He was sentenced to 6 months in prison and ordered to attend a rehabilitation program. Jenny was granted a protective order, and her divorce was approved. As the verdict was read, Hillary bowed his head, but when he looked up at Jacob, the hatred in his eyes still burned. Jenny turned to Jacob, tears rolling down her face. "Thank you, Jacob," she whispered. He nodded. He didn't do it for her. He had done it for Grace. For Kayla. For anyone who had ever suffered the way they had. As he walked out of the courtroom, Jacob felt a weight lift from his shoulders, but also an emptiness he couldn't name. He had held his father accountable, but he didn't feel victorious. He only saw a man who had destroyed everything, now paying the price. He called Kayla that night. "You did it, Jacob," she said with pride. "Mom would be so proud of you." He smiled, tears sliding down his cheeks. "I hope so, Kayla." That autumn, the streets of Delaware were blanketed with golden leaves. Jacob stood outside the prison gate, his hands deep in his coat pockets, his breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. He had come to see his father, not for revenge, but for understanding. He passed through the heavy gates. A guard led him into the visitation room, a dull gray space with metal tables and plastic chairs. Jacob sat and waited, staring through the thick glass. When Hillary entered, Jacob saw that prison had changed him. He was thinner, his hair almost fully gray, and deep lines carved into his face. His eyes, once sharp and terrifying, were now dull hollow. He picked up the receiver, looking at Jacob through the glass. "Jacob," he finally said. Jacob lifted the phone. His voice was steady. "I didn't come here to laugh at you, Dad. I came because I need to know why. Why did you do what you did, to Mom, to me, to Jenny?" He didn't expect the truth. He didn't even expect remorse. But he had to ask. Hillary gave a lifeless smirk. "You think I'm a monster, don't you? Maybe I am. But life hasn't been easy. I tried. I failed. The drinking, it changed me." He looked down at his trembling hands. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it." Jacob stared at him, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel hate or fear. He saw only a broken man, one who had destroyed his own life and everyone around him. "I'm not forgiving you," Jacob said quietly. "Not because I don't want to, but because I can't forget. You hurt my mother. You hurt Kayla. You hurt me. But I hope you'll find a way to make peace with yourself, even if it's too late." Hillary said nothing. He just nodded. Jacob stood, placed the receiver down, and walked out. As he stepped into the cold, he felt the final weight lift from his chest. He didn't need Hillary's apology. He didn't need closure. He had come to end a chapter, and that was enough. Back at the office, he kept working. He represented women and children trying to escape violence. People like Grace, like Jenny, like Kayla. Every case was hard, but every case gave him a chance to fulfill the promise he had once made, to be the protector his mother had never had. Looking back on his journey, Jacob knew life had been harsh, but it had taught him things no school ever could. He learned that strength wasn't in anger or fists. It was in resilience. He learned that justice wasn't always easy, but it was always worth the fight. And most of all, he learned that love, real love, was what had kept him going. The love of his mother. The love of Kayla. The support of Tina and Anderson. If he could give one piece of advice, it would be this. Don't let pain define you. And if you can help someone, help them. Even a small act of kindness can change a life. He didn't know what the future held. But he knew one thing for sure. He would keep fighting. Fighting for grace. For Kayla. For people he hadn't met yet, but who needed someone to stand up for them. And in his heart, under the old oak tree, his mother still smiled. And he knew she was proud.